Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all very well, and I want to extend a wholehearted welcome to the latest episode of 5 Essex Court's Sofa series. For those that don't know me, I'm Mark Thomas, a barrister at 5 Essex Court. I specialise in employment, police, public and information law. This week, we're doing something slightly different. On previous editions of the Sofa series, a number of my wonderful colleagues have been sharing their insights with you on a range of areas of law. Today, however, we are calling on the expertise and experience of friends outside of 5 Essex Court to talk to us about mental health and well-being, particularly within the context of the legal services industry. The world has changed and our lives with it. The pandemic has no doubt brought challenges for everyone. One of the biggest questions must be, how on earth do we manage our professional and personal lives following such a sudden and dramatic change? At the start of lockdown, you will recall light-hearted reflections on adapting to new working practices and working from home. We have workspaces that incorporate kitchen tables, spare rooms, garden benches, and everything in between. Anxiety about the appropriate dress for video conferences and virtual court appearances. We've probably all enjoyed more than a few virtual quiz evenings to stay in contact with colleagues. And I've lost count of the number of emails I've seen signed off with the ominous phrase, "Stay safe." These are clearly all signs of a strange time, but they're also no doubt rather superficial. But we're now at a different stage. The new normal is becoming strangely normal. And so it feels appropriate that we take the opportunity now to reflect on well-being. In the legal services industry, which is known to be competitive with expectations of high performance and where we're always trying to seek the upper hand for our clients, it isn't long ago the discussions of well-being were greeted with, at best, skepticism. However, following such dramatic changes over the past few months, it may well be in our own self-interest to understand more about this topic. Certainly, as lawyers who invest time, thought, and care to secure the best possible outcomes for our clients, looking at ways to safeguard the mental well-being of ourselves, our colleagues, and our clients means this topic may also have commercial imperatives too. And so I am delighted to be able to be joined by three friends of 5 Essex Court who are going to share their own reflections and expertise with us on the topic of well-being. Firstly, we have Holmes and Jacques from Taylor Vinters. As many of you will know, Taylor Vinters is an international law firm with a particular focus on acting for clients in technology, biosciences, and innovation. Jan is the Learning and Development Manager at Taylor Vinters. Claire is a technology, data privacy and commercial contracts lawyer and an accredited psychotherapist. They are going to speak to us about the practical and innovative approach taken by their firm to mental resilience. They will then hand over to Kerry Stevenson, who is a mental resilience trainer from Tough Cookie. Tough Cookie provides support to a huge range of blue chip organisations, including Shell, Sky, the BBC, Ofgem and Google, to name just a few. And Kerry is going to talk to us about the connection between thoughts and physiology and introduce us to ways to build stronger mental resilience. So with that brief introduction, I shall hand you over to Jan.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you for asking us to join you today to discuss this important topic, particularly during these uncertain times we're all facing. So as Mark said, I'm Jan Holmes and I'm the L&D manager at Taylor Vinters. I also have responsibility for wellbeing and I'm a trained mental health first aider. So at Taylor Vinters, I see us as being on a wellbeing journey. I don't think that journey will ever end. I think it will just change and evolve according to our current circumstances. But when we first started out on this journey, we felt like things like workplace exercise classes, having fresh fruit in each office, encouraging people to walk while they were having meetings, and implementing a cycle to work scheme would mean that we would have happy and healthy employees. I think these are still really relevant and well-received initiatives. However, after reading the Stevenson Pharma report, Thriving at Work, which looks at workplace mental health, we realised there was much more work to do. And I also came across this saying, apples and pears and walking upstairs do not make a wellbeing strategy. So that made me really think I needed to get on with things. So the Thriving at Work report highlighted the need for what we call a good workplace. So what does a good workplace look like? So it's somewhere where people feel stable and safe, where they have access to good quality and a good quantity of work. They're fairly employed with regards to earnings and job security. Where possible, they're able to request flexible working arrangements, and they get given good opportunity for training, promotion, and personal growth. So at Taylor Vinters, we know that all of these things are important to our people, and we know that from the regular engagement surveys we carry out. We know that the people we work with, our colleagues, are really important to us. We know doing great work for great clients is important to us. So how have we translated this into action at TV? So we've now got a fully trained team of mental health first aiders whose purpose it is to provide proactive support to our tribe. We're not counsellors, but our role does include spotting early signs of mental ill health, starting supportive conversations with colleagues who may be experiencing a mental health problem or feeling emotionally distressed, signposting our people to appropriate professional support, and also opening up conversations around areas of what we call avoidable stress in the business. So rather than just firefight when people are feeling the effects of mental ill health, our role as a mental health first aider is try to be more proactive about talking about mental health. And so we often run wellbeing activities. So most recently, we ran a program around Mental Health Awareness Week. And the type of things we rolled out that week, we did some webinars around wellbeing issues. The theme of that week was kindness. So we tried to expand on the kindness theme. So one of the things we did is we encouraged our colleagues to shout out to their colleagues about acts of kindness they'd received during lockdown. And this seemed to be really well received. The other thing we did was some virtual desk drops to people's homes. So we sent all of our employees just a small card with a reminder of the access to support they have if they're feeling the effects of mental ill health. We also included a kind bar, which is a snack bar we thought they could enjoy whilst they were watching these kindness webinars. And these activities have a purpose, really. They're designed to get everyone talking about mental health. More importantly, we're trying to spread a message, and that message is you might see in various articles about 1 in 4 people struggling with mental health issues. But what I'd like to suggest to you today is that we all have a mental health. It's a continuum and it can fluctuate on a regular basis. So what I'm trying to say is it's okay not to be okay. So we found recently that some people that were thriving before lockdown are actually struggling now they're home-based and don't have their colleagues around them. And others that were previously struggling have found they're flourishing in this new environment. So just take time for yourself to realise that these feelings are normal and we're all grappling with them. My colleague Claire will be talking to you in more detail about these feelings, what they mean, and some coping mechanisms for dealing with them. But before we move on to Claire, I wanted to talk to you about an initiative called the Mindful Business Charter. The Mindful Business Charter is a set of best practice principles to tackle and reduce avoidable stress in the workplace. This charter is particularly being used within the legal sector, although I see it rapidly expanding to other sectors. And we're hoping to sign up to this charter at the next opportunity, which is in October. And we plan to use the period between now and then to continue our journey to understand what mental health issues our people are experiencing and what we can do to support them. It will be important to remember that signing up to the charter is only the first step. And really, in making this commitment, we're just signalling that we agree that it's our responsibility to do things differently, and we're striving towards better mental health in our workplace. So there are 4 key pillars of the Mindful Business Charter. The first is openness and respect. And what that covers basically is finding out how your colleagues, your clients, and your contacts like to communicate, and using that method of communicating with them. Being respectful of people's time. So when you're arranging meetings, do you really need to invite the whole of your chamber, or you know, can you really consider who needs to be in that meeting? And, you know, having an agenda that you stick to, that can make you more respectful of people's time, and not cancelling at the last minute. We all know people who like to do that. Also avoiding the overuse of emails. So don't just copy someone in for the sake of it, and when they don't need to receive it. The third pillar is respecting rest periods and giving consideration to the need to switch off. So we all have different work styles, particularly in this new norm. We need to consider, when we're sending those emails late at night, what impact they're going to have on the recipient. So for example, if you're a senior partner and you like to work 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, and you're sending out that email, if a young trainee is just going off to bed but checks his emails, how is that going to impact on them? They're receiving that from a senior person, and they're going to stay up no matter how tired they are and deal with that email. So can you consider instead whether you can use the Microsoft Outlook facility of delaying receipt of that email? So you're still sending it at a time you like to work in the evening, but it doesn't actually land into somebody's inbox until normal working hours the following day. Also respecting people's right to take annual leave and not expecting them to check emails while they're on leave. And when you're in a senior role, it's a good idea to role model that behaviour yourself, because people are more likely to follow suit if you're actually having complete switch off during your annual leave. The last but by no means least pillar of the Mindful Business Charter is around mindful delegation. And that's about respecting the need to provide sufficient context and information when you're delegating a piece of work. It's about negotiating rather than imposing deadlines. And it's about instilling confidence in your team to be able to flag when they think that a deadline is unrealistic or unachievable. If you want to learn more about the Mindful Business Charter, you can check out their website at mindfulbusinesscharter.com. I'm now going to hand over to Claire, who will talk to you specifically about what it means to be resilient and the relationship with acknowledging and expressing feelings, particularly relevant in this COVID time. Claire.
Thanks, Jan. Firstly, I just wanted to say, as an employee of Taylor Vinters, of course, I'm both contributing to and a beneficiary of some of the initiatives that Jan's been talking about. So really, from my perspective, it's such a breath of fresh air, and it's so motivating that these just aren't ideas, but actually they reflect my experience and the culture of the firm. So thank you for that. So I'm going to talk today a bit about the importance of acknowledging feelings, particularly difficult feelings during a global pandemic, and how this relates to resilience. So I'll start with a quick introduction about me. So my name is Jacques. I'm a practicing lawyer, so I've been working for more than 15 years as a commercial lawyer specialising in data and technology. And I'm also a qualified psychotherapist. So I did, for my sins, a 5-year master's training in psychotherapy. And for the last 5 years, I've been working the two professions side by side. So working in private practice as a therapist and also working as a lawyer. So I think this brings me a particular perspective to lawyer wellbeing, because I'm continuing to appreciate really on a daily basis the stresses, the challenges and the opportunities of being a lawyer, the need to turn work around quickly, responding to tight deadlines and managing client and colleague expectations. So I'll confess, over the years, but particularly at the beginning when I was a trainee and I just qualified, I would get particularly stressed and worried about whether I was doing a good enough job. And the other thing that I would do is I would hide that from my colleagues and superiors, because I did not want to appear like I wasn't coping or I couldn't hack it. What's changed over the years through having my own therapy and also training as a therapist is I've learned to understand much better and become more aware of the signs and the impact of those stresses and pressures, you know, at the mental, physical and psychological level. So to give you an example, I was due to log in at 12:15 and say hello to my colleagues, at 2:15 and say hello to my colleagues, and I couldn't download the Zoom app. My heart rate went through the roof. I started to get very hot. My palms were sweating. I was officially stressed. How did I cope? Well, I clocked it. I know I overreact when I think I'm going to be late. I breathed a bit. I managed to get in. So that's just a little mini example of ways in which I might respond. But I think really what I want to say is that I believe that in acknowledging our emotions is grounded in my own experience. So I have a question, not one that any of you are going to answer, maybe a question to think about. And that is there a place for emotions in the workplace? Question mark. So if we kind of take the 20th century stereotype of the professional, you might describe them as calm, rational, in control, unemotional. They'll probably adopt the great British stiff upper lip spirit, particularly if it's a crisis. So absolutely perfect for these times in this pandemic. I think what might go alongside that, though, is an incredible fear of appearing vulnerable, that might make us weak if we admit that we aren't coping, and actually a real fear of judgment from others. So really all us professionals are just these swans seemingly gliding gracefully across a calm river, when heaven knows what's actually happening underneath the surface. So there's good news really, and that is the burgeoning field of neuroscience, because it has completely reframed our understanding of the human mind and also the autonomic nervous system, which is more grounded in our physiology. And that has completely transformed what it actually means to be resilient. So it's not actually having an unlimited capacity to cope and suppressing our feelings, which actually could lead to burnout, but it's about acknowledging our pressures, limits, and personal needs. It's enabling us to regulate, notice, manage our feelings. I think the other thing I wanted to say is that when we actually share our feelings and we connect emotionally with others, that breeds psychological resilience. So now I've given you a bit of science to add some credibility to what I want to say. I'm going to do a quick experiential exercise. So it's good that you're all on mute and there's no camera, so there's no excuses, but I wondered if everybody could grab a pen and a piece of paper if they've got one. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just write down how you were feeling right this moment. So you could all have a go at doing that, whether that's distracted, sleepy, hot, stressed, bored, I don't know. If I was writing it down right now, I would say bit stressed, calming down now. The next thing I'd like you to do is to say it out loud. And when you say it out loud, just see whether you're feeling what you're saying. And also notice whether you've got any physical reaction. So when I said it earlier, I could just feel my heart slightly throbbing in my chest. A little bit hot and clammy, but obviously it's 31 degrees out there. And finally, what I'd like you to do is just spot whether there's any judgment about what you're feeling. I am feeling tired, but never mind, I shouldn't make a fuss. So whether you're dismissing it or minimizing it in any way. So the reason that I've asked you to do this little brief exercise is that often when we actually acknowledge, we say what we are feeling, we can experience it differently. Actually, it can feel more real. I've also noticed that when you say it to somebody else and they listen, they acknowledge what you've said, that can also reframe, help ourselves understand a bit better what we're feeling. So if I kind of bring us back to our experience during COVID. So I don't know about you, but actually it's brought up a lot of feelings in me. Loss, fear, uncertainty, gratitude, love for my family. So I'm kind of getting the sense that people generally are being more open with each other throughout this experience. So I think there's an opportunity here. I think the pandemic is giving us permission as lawyers, as professionals, to actually be more open about our feelings. And as I've said, when we go back to the neuroscience, being more open is actually beneficial for our well-being. And from my experience, when you have these open and honest conversations with people, you tend to build better relationships with them. So if I kind of go back to our reactions during this crisis, how we're all reacting is very personal and context-driven. Some of us are exhausted parents and feel pulled in different directions. Should be a few people nodding when I say that. Others have found it a really lonely time where they've been very much on their own, cut off from their friends and family. I also want to acknowledge that many people have shared positive feelings, that actually they've had time to slow down. There's no commute. They've got more space to appreciate their life, their family, their garden. That's definitely the case for me. My garden has never been cared for so much as over the last few months. So I think the first thing to say is there's such an opportunity for us right now to experience that, to share it with someone else, acknowledge it, and then maybe bottle it, keep hold of it. Remember that good experience that you had during this time and see if you can keep it once we're back to normal. If I come back to the difficult feelings though, which are often harder to talk about, there's just a couple of themes that I wanted to share with you all. And the first one are the feelings of loss. So I would say it's a common experience that there is such a deep sense of loss and sadness about what is happening around us. I mean, like, let's not forget, people are dying. We're getting this roll call of numbers every day. I have to admit, it has shocked me, even though it's also become normal to just see it shown in a graph. But actually there are other losses, aren't there? Children are missing school. Holidays have been cancelled. I was supposed to be going to Tanzania in August, just got my refund, gutted. We've also been separated from family and friends when we've needed them the most. And some people have been deprived of physical contact. I would also say that we've lost predictability that we take for granted in daily life, going for a haircut, going to the cinema on a Sunday afternoon. So you might want to consider for yourself, what types of losses have you experienced and how are you minimising them? So when I've also been talking with other people, one of the things that struck me is how many have said that it has brought up other losses in their life, whether it's to do with loved ones or illness or other difficult circumstances. That is definitely the case for me. So I will share that I grew up with my younger brother Adam, who had a chronic respiratory condition called cystic fibrosis. So growing up, he shared with me his fear and reality of how a virus might impact his lungs and immune system. And by heck, it did. There were many scary moments, trips to the hospital. Now, he died 2 years ago. And so COVID has brought back to me the memories of those earlier times, and it raises my stress levels as it did growing up. I can't talk about it even now to you all, people that I can't see, without feeling some emotion, some sadness about it. But you see, when I acknowledge my grief rather than minimize it, and I share those feelings, it helps me make sense. It gives me some context to my experience of loss in the here and now. So the second common response are feelings of fear and uncertainty. Who does not ask themselves the question, this is interminable. How long is this going to go on for? Is there going to be a second wave? How will we cope? What about schools? You can see how my tone can get quicker. The stress levels go up as I think about it, but does that sound familiar? So we all feel stressed and anxious from time to time, particularly if we're under pressure and we have a deadline to meet. When I'm stressed and under pressure, as I said, I feel it physically. My heart rate beats quicker. I'm more alert. My shoulders are tense. And so evolutionary psychology tells us this is due to the body's hard wiring to produce adrenaline and cortisol, as if they were a real external threat. The thing is, though, COVID-19 outbreak is a real external threat. So it can activate all of our stress responses even more. Of course, we know that if there's prolonged exposure to stress, this takes an emotional, physical toll on us. Now you see, and I've learnt this to my own detriment, when anxiety and stress overwhelm us, we fall back on our learned strategies to manage them, those default ways of adapting to threat and the ways of coping that we learnt growing up. And you know what? They're not all in our best interests. We might suppress our feelings. Everything's fine, big smile. We might overwork. We might over-exercise. We might smoke. Might drink alcohol more perhaps than we need to. And these are just examples of strategies with just short-term benefits. So again, I'm suggesting there's a real opportunity here during this pandemic to build an awareness of how your body responds to stress and pressure. So you notice what your strategies are, what are short-term and what are more helpful for well-being of your body and mind. And Kerry will talk about this a bit more shortly. So I'm just going to finish off with a few top tips of mine for managing difficult feelings and maintaining resilience. So the first one really, and I'm definitely beating the drum for this, acknowledge difficult feelings, don't judge them. Secondly, build some mindful awareness of your own particular stress response and how you manage your stress, how you react. If you're a worrier and you're impacted by this uncertain future, it can be really useful to learn how to stay grounded in the present. So the concept I find really helpful is called both and. So it just means that you feel both the loss in the present, I feel the grief and sadness, and I also feel safe exactly where I am with my family in my garden. The next one is to keep moving. For me, I just love dancing. It totally reduces stress in my body, yoga too, but importantly, when we move, it calms the nervous system. The same goes for breath. And you know, often we're all holding our breath or breathing in a very shallow way. So start noticing how you do that and whether you can elongate your breath. And the final one, which I think brings us full circle to where we started, is this sense of community and purpose. You know, let's face it, this is a time of collective tragedy. So there's this huge opportunity to come together rather than go it alone. So you can get involved with workplace or community initiatives because it's such a good way to connect with others and feel motivated by a shared purpose. So to finish with reflections in the workplace, we all know, especially in times like this, that our clients and our colleagues need motivated and emotionally healthy lawyers and professionals. So if we're able to acknowledge and express our emotions, all our emotions, that is a key part of achieving to this. Okay, that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Kerry now, who is going to bring a more experiential flavour to some of the themes I've started to explore with you.
Thank you, Claire. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much, Jan and Claire, for sharing what you did. It's really lovely to have the context of what's going on right now for us all. So yeah, my name is Kerry and I'm a mental resilience trainer from Tough Cookie. And we are an organisation of over 35 trainers from all walks of life. But the one thing we all have in common is that we've got a lived experience of recovering from a mental health problem. And a lot of that recovery is due to some of what I'll be talking about today. So with Tough Cookie, what we're interested in is reaching people before they get to a crisis point. And this really means giving them tools to manage their thoughts and emotions whilst they're at home, at work, socializing, whatever setting, as well as those bigger sort of one-off challenging life events. And, you know, when, as Claire touched on, when chronic stress gets out of hand, of course, when that builds up, it can lead to burnout, overwhelm, mental health breakdowns. And we really want to offer the knowledge and the tools that basically we wish we'd had when we were struggling before things get to breaking point. So we do this by going into different organizations and sharing a set of 12 tools to manage thoughts and emotions based on the latest research in neuroscience and psychology. So the tools that we teach and what I'm going to be talking about are things that we can do anywhere at any time, regardless of physical ability or external factors. So it's really tools that we can tap into, even if, say, we've broken our leg and we're bedbound for a few weeks. These are things we can still do, right? So it's not dependent on external things. So just to begin, I'd really like to briefly share my own personal mental health story. And I think it's really important that we normalize sharing these sort of vulnerabilities with each other, especially in these quite scary spaces of a big audience. Because just normalizing those conversations and saying like, yeah, me too, I've also been through that struggle, is a really wonderful and healthy way to start building these connections with each other, and also to make it okay to reach out. So for myself, it kind of started really, as it often does in childhood, and I went through a lot of really big change. I moved continents, my family broke down, and I had to quickly adapt to new life in England. And I found, what I realized in hindsight was that I actually used coping techniques that at the time were really kind of displaying themselves like OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. And this was my way of feeling safe when I didn't know how else to deal with it. And that progressed really through my teens into my early 20s into panic disorder. So I would start having panic attacks out of the blue, and they became so regular that actually it started to affect my work. I couldn't get on the tube to get to work in the morning. I might have to leave work early for having a panic attack. And I really didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't have the tools, and I kept it very much to myself. And it was actually when I was doing my master's and I was studying neuroscience in London, and I came across a study about mindfulness, this thing, mindfulness meditation, and how an 8-week program could significantly change the structures in the brain, specifically related to an area of the brain called the amygdala, which is directly linked to our detection of fear, or our sense of fear and detection of threat. And I started to join the dots and kind of go, okay, well, I've got really bad anxiety, and maybe if I do this practice, it will help to restructure my brain. And so I gave it a go. And in my very first session with a group, I had to leave the room because I had a panic attack, because he was asking me to pay attention to sensations in my body. But over time and over the years, I really stuck with it. And I downloaded the Headspace app, which is wonderful if anyone's heard of it. And I kept doing a kind of regular practice, as well as going to in-person groups. And it had such a strong impact on me and my anxiety levels that I decided to train to become a teacher, to teach mindfulness. So that's what I do today. And I think that the key thing that I've touched on there is that I didn't have someone when I was growing up sit me down and explain, right, this is your mind and this is how it works and this is what to do when it works against you. And I just want to invite everyone who's listening and watching to reflect on that for yourself. Did you ever have an elder, a parent, a guardian, a relative sit you down and say, right, this is your mind, this is how it works, and when it works against you, this is what you can do? And very often when we do this in a big group together, no hands go up to say, yes, they had that. And this is our minds we're talking about. This is the thing that we experience every single moment of our lives through. And no one taught us how to take care of it. And that's because they were never taught and they were never taught. So it's an ancestral kind of lack of teaching. So just to go into a little bit what we mean by the mind is a very tricky thing to define, and different people have got different ways of saying what the mind is to them. But I think we can largely agree that one thing that the mind does or holds is our thinking processes, right? So thoughts appear in the mind. And for the sake of this talk, we'll just say that thoughts are mental chatter inside the skull. Okay, so that could be words, sentences, images, sounds, right? And there are different flavors of thoughts. So we can have reminders or imaginations, rehearsals, reconstructions, so on and so forth. And I'd really just like to try and demonstrate to you the power of our thoughts, how powerful our thoughts can be and our imagination in terms of the physical effects that they can have on our body. So if you want to join me in a little short visualization exercise, please do. And I invite you to get comfortable in your chair and to close down your eyes if that feels okay, or you can lower your eyes, but preferably closed. And I'd like you to just imagine that you are standing in your kitchen. Just have a look around the different surfaces, the cupboards. Now just walk over to one of the countertops in your kitchen. And you'll notice that there's your favorite chopping board. And on top of the chopping board is a bright yellow zingy lemon. And just take hold of the lemon and you'll see that there is a knife next to the chopping board. And you're going to pick the knife up and holding the lemon in your other hand, you're just going to slice through the middle of the lemon, cutting it into half. Maybe already you can smell some of the flavors. Maybe you get a glimpse of the glistening surface of the lemon. And then taking one half, just cutting that again into two. And I'd like you to imagine just picking up 1/4 of the lemon and bringing it towards your face. Just having a look at it, maybe smelling what's there, bittersweet. And then you're going to take one big bite down into the lemon, feeling all the juices of the lemon release into the mouth. You can taste the bitterness, some sweetness. Just allowing all of the flavors, the sensations to permeate. And you can place your 1/4 of a lemon down. And when you feel ready, you can open up the eyes again. So obviously I can't see or hear from everyone, but I'm hoping for at least some of you, you experience some real physical effects there. Some people might feel that kind of tangy feeling in the back of the jaw. Maybe it's saliva in the mouth, maybe kind of scrunching up the nose. Maybe you even smelt those flavors of the sweet bitterness. And what's the point in doing this little exercise? Okay, what we're seeing is that our imagination alone, just by imagining biting into a lemon, our body responded as if that was really happening. Right, so our whole nervous system can't really tell the difference between what's real and what's imagined. And so it's kind of funny when it's a lemon, but what about when we're imagining something really negative, losing our job or losing a loved one or having a difficult conversation with someone? Okay, then what is that doing to our body? When we're imagining those scenarios, really strongly negative scenarios, it could trigger a full-blown stress response in the body, right? We release adrenaline, maybe cortisol to keep that stress response going. And so we might think, okay, well, I'll just stop myself from having any negative thoughts. That'll sort it out. And I'd like to see if that's actually a valid way to go about this. So again, I'd like to invite you to just try a little exercise with me. And just for about 15 to 20 seconds, you're going to close your eyes And in that time, I'd like you to, whatever you do, just do not think about a white polar bear. Just don't think about a white polar bear. 15 seconds. Try really hard. Okay, by now, maybe some of you have already thought of the white polar bear. So this exercise is really showing that actually the more that we try to stop certain thoughts from coming up, actually the more that they tend to pop back up. And what this is called is the ironic process of mental control. And this is where something that we're trying to not think about or suppress actually gets brought to mind more often, because the brain needs to check the thing that it's supposed to not be thinking about. So it brings it to mind to say, am I thinking about that thing? Yes, no, okay, now I am. So it's this really ironic process. And it kind of just goes to show that what we suppress tends to just come back until we give it full acknowledgement. So we don't have control over every single thought that arises in the mind, okay? So it's also important to know that our thoughts are affected by cognitive biases. And there are thousands of different cognitive biases that obviously I won't go into now, but there are two really important ones that's worth mentioning. And the first one is negativity bias, and the second one is impact bias. And negativity bias is essentially our evolved, it's our evolved tendency to be drawn to the negative, right? So we've got two events of sort of equal salience. We're going to be drawn to the negative. We're going to be more likely to remember it. We're going to be more likely to imagine a negative scenario, because our brain is wired for survival, not to be happy. But we'll come on to how we can work with that. And impact bias is where we tend to overestimate the impact of events on what that's going to do to our lives, right? So we might find ourselves catastrophizing. Well, if this happens, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen. And it's just good to be aware that we have these cognitive biases, because it will just explain why we can get into these periods of rumination and worry and therefore get ourselves stressed. So if you find yourself worrying or overly focusing on the negatives, just know that that is normal. That's kind of what your brain was evolved to do. But now I want to talk about what we can actually do about it. Okay, so what do we have some control over? And this all comes down to our attention. Okay, so to a large extent, we do have choice over our attention, where we place our attention in any given moment. Now, you might argue in modern conditions, we're bombarded by adverts and all of this stuff that's distracting us, and that's very true. But attention is like a muscle, so we can train our attention to be more focused by doing particular practices on a regular basis. So again, the more experiential stuff, if you just put your hands out in front of you, I'd like you to just take your attention to your right thumb and just see if it's possible, without moving it or doing anything to it, just see if you can notice any sensations in your thumb. Just put your full attention there. Then maybe moving your attention to your left palm. Can you feel anything there? If you put your hands down, maybe taking your attention to your belly. You notice that your belly is moving as you breathe. So as you can see, and if I stopped guiding now, you could choose to take your attention to your phone, to the sounds in the space around you, to my face on the screen. So we have this autonomy over where we place our attention in any given moment. And it's also really helpful for us to understand how the primal brain works. So this is the part of our brain that's ancient. It's evolved long, long time ago, that we share with reptiles and mammals. And this part of the brain is what is wired for survival. Okay, so the primal brain encompasses the limbic cortex, which is kind of our emotional regulation, and as well our brainstem, which is very basic survival functions like breathing and heart rate. And these two work together to essentially run a surveillance system through the body, right? So they're picking up on signals throughout the body via the vagus nerve. And these are lots of different nerve endings that go throughout the body to all the different organs and muscles. And they're essentially picking up on signals that tell the brain, am I safe, or is there danger, or am I doomed? Essentially 3 simple states that we can be in at any given time. And if we're safe, we're in this kind of social connection, rest and digest. But if we're in danger, we might have the desire to activate and fight or flee. And thirdly, if we sense doom, then we might shut down when we go into freeze. And this is an immobilization response. So when we're triggered into a stress response, be that fight, flight, or freeze, we need to learn how to communicate with the primal brain in its language, in its own language, because the primal brain doesn't speak logic or rational thought, right? It speaks in the language of the physiology of the body. And the primal brain is always listening to many things, but especially our breath, our heart, and our musculature. So today I just want to finish on a really simple tool that uses the breath. And this is, again, something you can do anytime, anywhere. When you feel mildly stressed, you can use this technique to get you through those moments. So again, just to finish, I invite you to close down your eyes for just a moment. And this is a practice of counting the breaths. And I'm going to guide you through it. You can just follow my guidance. What we're going to do is breathe in for a count of 4 and breathe out for a count of 6. And I'll explain afterwards why this can help to reduce our stress. So just getting comfortable in your seat, noticing the supports beneath your body, becoming aware of the fact that you are breathing. We're going to start counting on the in-breath. So as you breathe in, counting up to 4, and as you breathe out, up to 6. So breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just carry on at your own pace. You might want to slow down even more. Just counting up to 4 on the in-breath and up to 6 on the out-breath. And as you're doing that, as you're counting with your breathing, just notice how your body physically feels on an in-breath compared to an out-breath. Does the body feel slightly tighter on an in-breath and softer on an out-breath? Okay, so letting go of that counting for now. Coming back to a sense of your body sitting. And in your own time, you can open up the eyes. So what we're doing there is we are allowing the body to be in the out-breath for 50% longer than the in-breath. And this is communicating with the primal brain that we are in safety for longer than we're in activation mode. Because when we breathe in, we're slightly activating the system into a stress response. And when we breathe out, we're deactivating the stress response ever so slightly. It's very subtle. But by giving ourselves 50% longer or more in the out-breath, we're allowing our system to rebalance, okay? To come back down from a stress response into relaxation. And you can do this for much longer, but we just did it very briefly there. due to time. So I'm going to leave it there, and just to say that that is one of 12 tools that we teach at Tough Cookie. And we deliver a mixed mental arts program, which is over 6 weeks, can be done at lunchtimes with teams. So there will be more information sent out after the webinar if you want to find out more. And thank you so much for listening and for practicing with us and trying all these weird little exercises. So I'll hand back over to Mark.
Thank you, Kerry. So there you have it. Wow, really interesting, thought-provoking stuff and discussion from Kerry, Claire and Jan. I think it certainly demonstrates the topic of well-being and mental resilience are really important topics that deserve real thought and engagement, both at an individual level, but also at a corporate level for all the organisations we work for and with. I'm sure that many of us could benefit from thinking more about well-being and mental resilience, whether to improve our own mental well-being or to better support those we work with. Thank you very much to Kerry, Claire and Jan. Their expertise and hard work in contributing to today's SOFA series is very much appreciated. And thank you very much for joining us for this edition of the SOFA series. Keep your eyes peeled for further events and publications from 5 Essex Court. We are always delighted to have the opportunity to have a chat with you. Cheers.